may already be familiar with the term DevoManc, devolution for Greater Manchester, but what exactly does that mean? What is it going to mean for Greater Manchester, and what is it going to mean for Stockport? The 10 councils in Greater Manchester, along with fire, police and health services, work closely together as the Greater Manchester Combined Authority to improve the services available to the people of Greater Manchester, one of the country's most successful city regions. The Combined Authority have agreed a plan to improve the lives of local people, the Greater Manchester Strategy. It sets out how they want Greater Manchester to grow, to attract investment and businesses into the area, to support local businesses, to build more homes and to create jobs for local people. They want to change the way local services are delivered to offer even better support to the people of Greater Manchester. This means bringing services like social care and health closer together so that they provide more effective joined-up support. To help deliver the plan, central government has given Greater Manchester a number of new powers and responsibilities as part of a devolution deal. This includes powers over health services, transport, skills and employment, spending and housing. To oversee these new responsibilities, Greater Manchester will have an elected mayor from 2017. Until then, Tony Lloyd has been appointed as mayor to support the work of the Combined Authority and to help speak up for Greater Manchester. This morning, we're very pleased to have Tony with us, and he will outline priorities of the Greater Manchester Strategy and how it will help to deliver economic growth. He'll discuss how public services and businesses can work more closely together, clarify roles and responsibilities for the Mayor for Greater Manchester and how they will deliver improvements to support local businesses. Following this, we have allocated 30 minutes for a Q&A session where you will have the opportunity to put your questions to Tony. We do have some questions in advance which I will ask the people who have put those questions forward to ask those first, and then we'll open it up to the floor. Can I also just say that Tony's presentation is being filmed this morning, but we will stop filming for the Q&A to make everybody feel as comfortable as they can. So, without further ado, I'd like to invite Tony Lloyd to talk to you.
I was, actually this is rather loud. Do I need this microphone or, yeah, okay. This is rather loud anyway, but for me, maybe okay for you. I was actually, Helen, I'm very grateful for the fact that, to save my embarrassment during the question and answer session, in case I get the answers wrong, we're not filming that bit. But obviously I'm very pleased to see such a large audience here today. The DevoManc, as it's popularly known, is already and will make a huge difference to the way we do things in Greater Manchester. But if I kind of want to start out by saying something positive about Greater Manchester and then one or two of the negatives that we live with. There are many positive things in Greater Manchester, and that runs through people in the voluntary and community sector. It involves people working in our public services, and it obviously involves people in this room who work for themselves, work for within the private sector, who are part of the dynamism that we know we are. We've got great universities, we've got great science and academia in our area, and we've got some things that really are world-beating in, for example, Christie Hospital down the road, the things like the Graphene Institute, etc. So things of which we can all be truly proud. And I know I say this in Stockport, but I'm a very Mancunian to the extent that I believe in the concept of Greater Manchester. I believe our gift to the world is enormous and indeed second to none. So this age-old question about Britain's second city, is it London, is it Birmingham, can be decided elsewhere. We'll just get on by being the best of them all. But actually there are some big challenges we face. Now, I'll give you a few illustrations. It can't be right that in a conurbation like this, that a child born in parts of inner cities, this applies, by the way, to Reddish in the Stockport borough, will probably live something like 10 years less than a child born on the same day in a more affluent part of our country. That's not right, and we have to do something about that, because that child not simply will live a shorter life, that child will have more days lost at school, will do less well at school, will go into less well-paid employment, and will lose more days in work during the course of the working life. And that, again, is both socially inefficient and actually morally unfair. It can't be a good thing that of the 300,000 families across Greater Manchester who are in receipt of some form of family benefit, 230,000 of those are people in families where somebody's in work. We have an endemic problem of low pay, and it can't be right either that when we look at those in our workforce who have no qualifications, our 11.6% of those who are in that bracket exceeds the national average of just short of 10%. Those things do matter because they hold back individuals and they hold us back as a conurbation. We have to do something about that. Now, what I would say to you is that in a way, the kind of things I've talked about, I do lay at the door. I'm a Labour politician, but let me say this, I lay it at the door of successive governments, Conservative government now, coalition governments, Labour governments, the failure for the Whitehall machine to deliver the level of sophistication that we need in delivering the services that a conurbation like this really must have. And we've got the chance with devolution to do something very different. We've got the chance to look in two areas, I suppose you could say generically. One, the ambition to reform the way we do things, and the second, the ambition to make sure that we're growing our economy and growing the opportunities within that economy for the people of the 2.8 million people of Greater Manchester. And these are enormous challenges, but the public service reform lies at the very centre of what we're all about. You heard from Helen earlier on the range of things that we will now take on devolved by central government. We think we can do better than central government. We think we can do better, for example, in organising our services. Health is probably going to be the biggest single challenge we face. We know that the present funding for health, if the demand continues to grow as we expect it to grow because of population changes, means that we'll be at the end of this by 2020 we'll be some £2 billion short in our health spending. We've got to take cost out of that. That means taking this rather crude term, demand, out of it, but actually what that means is we're satisfying the human need in our health system better, and this involves you actually as employers. We know that days lost in this conurbation through ill health, and days lost in particular through mental health, are extraordinarily high. Mental health is probably, well, not probably, mental health is the biggest cause of days lost in the workplace, and actually we have very poor mental health services in this conurbation. It's in everybody's interest that we get the arrangements around our mental health services done better for you as employers, for you actually as individuals, because I won't do this, but sometimes I say to audiences, please put your hand up if you have no experience, either personally or through those you love, of mental health breakdown. And very rarely do I get people putting their hands up in any audience, because of course mental health is something that mental illness is something that affects most of us either directly or indirectly. We've got to do something about that, and we can do better by localising the way we do things. It can't be right that we have 4 mental health trusts which don't properly operate in an integrated fashion. It can't be right that the mental health services have always been disaggregated from the health services more generally and are always the poor relation. So we can change those things by the kind of arrangements we have at local level. I would just give you one example before I move off health, which is not it's not an easy one. It's one though that may again be something that some people in this room are familiar with. There's a story of a friend of mine whose elderly mother, 75-year-old mother, had dementia, severe dementia. She was taken into hospital. The hospital treated the physical condition that she went in, but because there wasn't the care package out in the community, she lay in a hospital bed far longer than she ought to have done. Now, what that meant is that somebody at 75 in a hospital bed with dementia, unable to know how she'd spent a day, whether she'd been for a walk, whether she'd been hydrated, in other words, had a cup of tea, not able to even grasp those basic things, her muscles atrophied. So when she came out of hospital, she was unable to walk. Now, that's a human scandal, not because anybody was doing the wrong thing, but because two systems couldn't get their act together. And we've got to do better. And that's why actually in Stockport, we've now got an increasingly strong concordat between the health services, the local council, and other parts of the appropriate services to make sure that we're re-engineering those ways of doing things in a way, hopefully, that says we can begin to see the day when we'll prevent that mismatch of our services because we can design at local level. Looking at areas like transport, I joke to myself, as you do when you're stuck in a traffic jam on the M60 on the Friday morning. Our transport system in Greater Manchester isn't really adequate for what we need, and our transport system from Greater Manchester to the world around us is one that's got to change. And we've got the opportunity with the devolution deal to do something practical, both in terms of transport within Greater Manchester. That's public transport. Improving public transport actually is good for private road users, although if I come onto the low carbon agenda, maybe I'll say something less helpful to private car users, including myself. We've got to improve our public transport system. We know that if we're to liberate the talent of people across this conurbation, allowing people to move freely across the conurbation is central to a properly functioning labour market. And also, it's central to a properly functioning society, to allow people to visit the grandmothers, to visit the hospitals, to go and watch Manchester United play, to do whatever it is that people want to travel around the conurbation for. We've got a challenge to make sure our transport system is there. The skills agenda is something that I think everybody in this room will know we've got to make real progress on. And frankly, central government hasn't been good enough. You know, there are some awful statistics, and I'll pick on one industry, construction. Sue Derbyshire, the leader of Stockport Council in the middle of the room with us today, has responsibility, amongst other things, for the housing policy that we operate across, obviously here in Stockport directly, but across the conurbation of Greater Manchester. We are building at the moment probably half of the houses every year that we ought to be building. Now that makes a difference to you as individuals. It makes a difference to companies if you're saying to people, come and live in this area if you want to invest in your staff. But the reality is this, is that if I were to say to Sue, which I'm not, here is trillions of pounds, let's liberate the housing, we would run up very quickly into skill shortage, because the construction industry in the northwest is disproportionately occupied now by people over 55 and then over 45. Well, you don't need to be a genius to work out what that means. It means that in the end, over the next decade or so, we will run into major skills shortages because we haven't got the integration between our further education system, between employers who want to train, and indeed, more generally, across the labour force. And we've got to do something practical about that to make a difference. And we're beginning to be able to do that because for the first time, we can bring together both employers, those who provide skills training in the public and the private and voluntary sector in a way that's simply been impossible in the past. Big challenge, but a challenge that we've got to face up to. I don't, Helen, intend to run through every aspect of the changes we've got to make, but what I would say is this, is that with issues like housing, like health, they may seem to be irrelevant to a business audience. They're absolutely fundamental, actually, to the quality and the nature of the workforce that you will be working with as the years go on. But obviously, in the end, what is devolution going to offer to businesses, large and small? Well, I think the challenge there is a big one. It's a challenge, and we'll probably come on to this. I know one or two of the questions will relate directly to this. The challenge is, at a time of shrinking resource from the public sector, what what does the partnership begin to look like? Well, the partnership, I think, begins to look like this, that we've got to grow the Greater Manchester economy. We've got to see the capacity for our industry, our commerce, our services to grow. This is about employment. It's about putting wealth and income back into the regional economy. It's about making sure, in the end, that in doing that you in the corporate sector can recognise that you can do well here in Greater Manchester. It's also about making sure that you as employers are able to provide the high quality employment that Greater Manchester needs as we move into the future. There will be virtually no unskilled jobs in our economy in 10 years' time. Well, to an extent, people have been saying this for a long time. But go back to what I said before about the fact that over 10%, in fact just short of 12% of our workforce is unskilled. They will be in our labour force for some time unless we do something about it. So we have to do things together. And the offer actually to business collective, I think, is that the partnership that Greater Manchester has developed over many years now between the public sector and the private sector is an increasingly strong one. We, for example, will have the opportunity, the Mayor will have the opportunity to put forward an increase in business rates. I'm sure this fills every one of you in this room with delight. But there is an important caveat on that, and the important caveat is this: is that can't be done without proper consultation with the private sector. Now, what that does mean is that even I can't predict what a mayor, elected mayor, a future mayor will have by way of ambition in that. But it means minimally there is the capacity to veto that if that's foolish. But actually, more importantly, there is the capacity to work together and say, where is this in everybody's interest to look at that kind of change in a way that is of advantage to you, of advantage, of course, more generally to Greater Manchester across the board. So the partnership between the elected mayor, the partnership between the combined authority and the business community is one that's built in both legally, but actually is built in culturally into the way we will do our business here in Greater Manchester. Because if we are to see growth, then it means increasing productivity. It means that investment in the skills we've talked about. It means access to the best in terms of research and development, that making the links between our universities, our colleges, and our business community ever stronger. That's something that we haven't done enough of in the past, although increasingly we're doing it better. Those things matter. If we're to see export, and I sometimes joke, then the capacity for us to have control, as we've got, of export programmes here in Greater Manchester does matter. But to me, for lots of small and medium-sized firms, export isn't necessarily the exotic export to Brazil. It isn't even necessarily the slightly less exotic export to Belgium. It might be exporting across the Pennines. It might be opening up the capacity for people to trade in ways we've not done before. Now, this does come back to things like the transportation links. It does mean coming back to the concept of working in a way that says, how can we use the public sector in partnership with the private sector to remove the barriers that make it difficult for you to organise your businesses in a way that provides that growth, provides that employment base that we want to see. I just want, if I can, to give you a very quick view of how the if you like, the institutional process will work across the conurbation. We've got, as probably many of you know, 10 local authorities in Greater Manchester, Stockport obviously being one of them. I'm not going to name them all. I'll let you do your own research if you feel that you're deficient in that particular piece of knowledge. But what that does mean is that the partnership that has been built up now over many years in forming the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, one of these quite ugly terms, I think soon we'll have to find something better as time goes by than Combined Authority. It doesn't trip off the tongue, and it certainly doesn't leap out as a bold step into the future. But the Combined Authority actually has provided a model of how 10 local councils can work together in a way that's both deepened but also widen the capacity for the public sector to work together, but also for the public sector to act as an engine of cooperation across the conurbation. We've got 10 local authorities, we've got 10 local authority leaders. Each of those local authority leaders is an integral part, and will continue to be, even with the elected mayor, an integral part of the governance of Greater Manchester. We won't have a president of Greater Manchester with unlimited powers. I sometimes say we won't have our own nuclear weapon. That may be a bit controversial in Labour Party circles at the moment, for those of you who read the papers. We won't have our own standing army, but we will actually have a system of governance where we're not giving to one individual the capacity to make life a misery if we see the wrong person elected. What we have got is a process whereby the 10 local authorities will both have to work with the elected mayor, but the elected mayor will have to work with the 10 local authorities. We've got at the moment a cabinet system of governance, and that will, I think, continue under the mayor. It means that the elected mayor has, of course, direct responsibility for some areas like transport, like policing, etc. But many of the functions, whether it be skills training, whether it be around housing development, whether it be around health, these will be powers that are spread across the 10 local authority leaders in that cabinet style of governance, to make sure that no individual can make decisions that are extreme or rash or foolish. There will be a collective system of governance. But importantly as well, the local enterprise partnership is built integrally into a relationship with the combined authority, which gives the voice for business a real and enduring role in the governance of Greater Manchester. Those things do make a difference, because in the end, one of the things that I know is that no individual elected mayor, no individual council leader, actually not even the people who represent business on the LEP, are representative of everybody, unless actually we have a commitment to a proper form of relationship with the wider community. This kind of engagement with the business community here in Stockport, but I do recognise one or two faces I think from beyond Stockport here as well. But this kind of engagement is something that we've got to make sure is built into the DNA of the Greater Manchester experiment, because if we're going to make devolution work, it won't work in some entirely top-down fashion. Of course, there's got to be Greater Manchester strategic framework that allows us to say, how do we move our conurbation forward? Actually, what we've got to have, though, is constant dialogue with the 2.8 million people of Greater Manchester, but importantly, those who are involved, whether it's in business and commerce, those involved in the voluntary community sector, those involved actually in the public sectors, to make sure that as we build that enduring partnership, it's one that advances the interests of the public service reform that I talked about before, making sure our public services deliver more intelligently to prevent that 75-year-old lady coming out of hospital unable to walk, that begins to allow us to operate in areas like the skills agenda, to say that we will begin to map up that gross oversupply of unskilled people in our workforce, that will allow us to begin to address the issue of that says that of those in receipt of family benefits, the overwhelming majority of families are people where somebody is in work. Those are enormous challenges. I'm actually genuinely confident that working together across the 2.8 million people and beyond, we can change the face of Greater Manchester and mean that when I say to you this is the best conurbation in the world, that we'll look back and say, yes, it really is, because we're doing things in a much more intelligent way, a much more focused way than we've ever done before. Thank you for being here this morning. That's probably enough, and let's move on to questions.